So I've thought a lot about how to be productive, how to do hard work. I've accumulated techniques over the years. I've actually have this book right next to me that I still haven't read, and I have Getting Things Done. That's in the back. So these are the latest ones that I'm reading, and I have a lot of lessons learned and things from books and things from TV shows and things that I've got from coworkers and people that I admire and mentors and these kind of things. And so I thought maybe I would do a video where I just list them, and maybe this can help you get focused, be productive, and get into actual hard work and get to places where you didn't think you could get. And I don't, I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly underperforming from my point of view and unhappy with my productivity and always trying to sort of strive to get better and find hacks and ways in in which I can get better. And I think anybody who's done true good work, anybody who's really killed it, has basically went through this whole shenanigans and went through learning, highs and lows, and learning how to be competitive and learning how to perform at a high level. And so you have to think about that constantly, and you have to you're, and I'm gonna talk about that, but you have to think of yourself as an athlete, at least if you want to really perform to the next level. um, if you want to have extraordinary results, then you have to be an extraordinary person. Extraordinary. And so you have to prepare yourself to sacrifice and be able to say no. And actually, maybe I should start with that. um, Maybe that should be my first point, to sacrifice. But before I get into that, let me count how many things I'm going to talk about. I might think of things on the way, but I have a list of 15 15 points that I want to talk about. So maybe the title of the video will be 15 things that you can do and improve about yourself to get to the next level and learn better and perform better. And maybe will be more as I find more things to talk about. But yeah, let's start with the sacrifice thing. This one I learned by, I think, looking at this what was his name, John Hive, or like this employee at this big guy at Apple that was talking about Steve Jobs and how Steve Jobs came to him and was like big on like sacrificing. And it was like, what have you sacrificed this week? And John would say, well, I've sacrificed, these people asked me to do this, and I said no to that. And so I didn't do that, and that allowed me to focus on my work. And Steve Jobs was like, no, no, no. Tell me what you've said no to yourself, like things you really wanted to do, things you really wanted to spend time on. And you were like, no, I'm not going to do that because there's more urgent work. I need to focus on these things. And so I've said no to these things. And I think that's where, before that, I understood that I had to say no and I had to focus on, specific things to make progress in things I wanted to make progress in. But that's when I understood that sacrifice is more than just saying no. It's saying no to yourself and saying no to, right now I want to like write this implementation, or I want to scroll on my phone, or I want to watch a movie, or I want to lay in bed. So it's about saying no to things you want to do. It's really this whole thing about being able to reprioritize and always keep in mind your priorities. So the second thing I want to talk about is from Feynman. You can find that story online, but he has a story called Disregard, where it was kind of a low point in his research life. I think he just got a Nobel Prize, and he was scared of not being able to get to do impactful research after getting that, and so he was kind of like roaming around, not making progress. And I don't really remember the story. It's a great story that you should read if you can find it. I think he was at a party, and he started reading something and then he shouted, "Disregard! I got the formula. Disregard." Kind of a eureka moment, and that's where he understood that he had to focus on his own research and completely disregard other people's research. And the way I interpret it is also that by comparing yourself and by constantly being exposed to other people's research and accomplishments and these kind of things, it's very hard to make progress on your own work. And so I've noticed that in myself. If I spend a lot of time, on Twitter looking at what other people are doing, or even on Slack, or when I was at Facebook, I used to spend a lot of time on Workplace, which was this internal Facebook that we had at the company, where people would post about their achievements, or teams would post about updates and these kind of things. You can quickly get into a mindset of, oh my God, these people are doing amazing work. I'm never going to be able to do these kind of things. And you tend to, I don't know, like sabotage yourself as you're doing that. And I've noticed that when I completely disregard what other people are doing and I just focus on doing my own thing, I'm actually able to achieve great things. If I had compared myself to others, I would have been like, what am I doing? I'm doing some work that's meaningless, or that's I'm a noob and I'm writing some shitty code. But as you're doing that, you tend to become an expert yourself. And actually, that's how you start doing good work and good research. And so comparing yourself really prevents you from getting into that zone and from starting good work also. Like it's kind of like you're staying on page one, and you're staring at the page and just thinking about the work that you have to do, and you never start. I'll come back on that actually. I have another point that's kind of similar, um, where you have to sort of silence your own thoughts, and it's sort of related to sacrificing, but that's the story about disregard. The third point I want to talk about is that you should not think about the future, and I guess that's related as well. But a lot of time, I don't know, when I want to go to the gym, I start thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to walk to the gym. I'm gonna have to um, talk to the guy at the gym. I'm very asocial, so whenever the staff talks to me, I'm like, oh my God, how do I talk to them? And this is just a me thing, but sometimes I think about these kind of things, and then I think of the I'm gonna have to run, I'm gonna have to lift, but when I don't think about these things, I just think about, okay, I need to go to the gym. I just pull myself there and I just start working out without really thinking about what I'm gonna do. Then I actually achieve much more than if I had thought about it. And I heard that saying which says horses can go a long way because they never think about how far they're trying to get. And so I do the same when I'm running. I run without really thinking of the destination, and I or look at the time or look at how many miles I've run. I try not to look at these things and just run until I'm really exhausted, and then I look. And I've noticed that I can go much further when I don't look and when I don't think about these things. And I think the same is true about work. Sometimes I try to get into a paper and I look at the paper and it's like 70 pages, very dense. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to get it. And I end up never reading it because I sabotage myself even before starting. And sometimes I just don't care about these things. I don't know why. And sometimes I just start reading a paper because I just want to read a paragraph and end up reading over the course of a week. I end up like finishing the paper, and then I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I've accomplished so much just because I didn't even think about, is it feasible? Am I gonna be able to read this whole thing? How am I gonna, get discouraged basically by thinking too much about the work to do. Um, and so I think this applies in a lot of cases. I've heard that like CEOs are trained not to think too much about the future and be in the present. I don't remember in what context I read that years ago. And so, yeah, overthinking about the future is really, in all sorts of things, is really self sabotaging. Sometimes just doing the work and just starting to work on something without really thinking about the future is really the best thing you can do. And usually for that, one thing that I do is that the day before I'm gonna, when I go to sleep and I stop working, I'll think about what I can do when I start my day the next day. And so this way I have a queue of things, and um, that's also a way I work, is that I try to, and I guess I can talk about that now. I try not to context switch, and I really try to focus on things. So that's my next point. And so it's good to have a queue where you can just pick the next thing in your queue and just focus on that. Not even think, is it hard? How much time am I going to spend on that? No, it's in your queue. You pop your queue, you work on that thing. And at the end of the day, you can reprioritize your queue and figure out what you should throw or re-rank in your queue and so on for the next day. Um, and you can do it with your calendar also, where you're like, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to work on that. And then I'm going to work on something else and so on. I think it's really good to kind of like remove all of these decisions of what am I going to work on from your mind, because they're kind of taxing, and come up with this queue that, sometimes you do some work where you will prioritize or construct that queue. And then whenever you want to do deep work, you don't try to prioritize things. You just look at your queue, take the next thing, focus on working on it, like a dumb machine, you know. Okay, so I wrote some notes, but it's kind of my handwriting is not always the best. Okay, so this one is about the environments. Sometimes you can't really control yourself, but you can control your environment. If you work in a place that's very noisy, it might be very disturbing to you. Or sometimes if you're at home and it's too quiet and you can't focus, then it's good to go to the library or go to a coffee shop. So this idea of controlling your environment, and it's not just for like something quiet. I've heard of having a lamp that you only turn on when you work, or having music that you only listen when you work. I think John Carmack was doing that, where he would play a CD and he would just count the number of times he would play that album during the day, and he would just, I'm guessing that he was sort of in the zone thanks to that. And he was kind of acting like a Pomodoro of some sort. And you can really control your environment in these ways, and I think that's all of these like kind of like hacks and brain hacks are good to take. And remove your phone. I actually have a phone gel. I don't really use it, but I thought that was fun when I bought it, where you can put your phone in it, set a timer, and then you cannot use your phone, and the thing is like locked until the timer runs out. And you can do that with I don't know, if you have a TV, you put the remote control somewhere that's far away, so that there's some friction to reach it, and so on. So the environment is the easiest thing to control. If you don't want to snack, don't have snacks in the fridge or in your cupboard, and so on. Okay, so this one is about, I can't remember, it's a YouTuber, like a mathematician that talks about mathematics. And I remember that he said, you're always 2 weeks away from catching up with something or from understanding something. And his point was that sometimes you feel overwhelmed and you feel like you're lacking some foundation. If you really want, you can have no life for 2 weeks and only read books and do exercises and so on, and you'll get there. A lot of the concepts are actually not that complicated, and you can get there in 2 weeks. Like there's many concepts like that in mathematics, where you can really get there in 2 weeks. Of course, if it's like advanced concepts and you don't even know what the natural numbers are, you might really have some way to get there. But believe me, I think most people have the concepts, the basic concepts, like real numbers and stuff like that. And you can really get to a lot of things in 2 weeks. It's all about motivation and reading the right book, and you can get there. And so that's where you really shouldn't. You really shouldn't overlook how much work you can do if you really focus on that. I guess I have two examples to prove that point. There's a famous mathematician. My teacher told me that story a while ago. I think it's called Weil, something like that. and he went to prison as part of his life. And apparently, he only had a pen and a piece of paper, and he achieved huge accomplishments in mathematics while he was in prison because he didn't have any distractions. And I think he jokingly said after going out of prison that every mathematician should spend some time in prison as part of their research. And so I really relate on that, having organized exile retreats for myself a number of times in my life, where I would get an Airbnb or a hotel somewhere for like a week, usually about a week, and I would just work on stuff. And sometimes I had a goal, sometimes I didn't really have a goal. I just wanted to catch up on some stuff, read papers, make videos, write something, or I was stuck on some research and I wanted to get unstuck. And every time I did this week of intense research where I would isolate myself somewhere, I would accomplish things that at the time were really big for me. And so that's something I've always wanted to do, is to do at least once a year is such a retreat, but I've actually haven't done it that many times, and I don't know what's stopping me from doing it, but I would encourage everyone to do it, and I really should plan my own retreat this year at some point. Um, okay, so next point is something that I started really getting after watching this Veritasium video. If you can find it, it's a video on how to become an expert at something. And he comes up with 4 points. I don't exactly remember what these 4 points are, but one of the point was a fast feedback loop in a valid environment. And so a fast feedback loop means that you can play with ideas and quickly get if your assumptions are right or wrong. And a valid environment is that this feedback thing that you can throw, you can throw your ideas and assumptions at, and that it tells you if you're right or wrong, is, let's say, almost 100% of the time correct. And he makes the example that in poker, since there is a lot of chance, then you can't really, if you have a good hand and you try to play it and you lose, it might tell you that this hand never works, but that's not true. You just got unlucky. And so poker is not a valid environment according to these definitions. But that's something I realized, that when I was trying to understand code, I used to spend a lot of time reading code, and it would be very hard for me to really understand things by reading code. And the moment where I switched to playing with the code, running the tests, playing with the test, printing things, debugging the code and stepping through the code, that's where I realized that a computer is much more clever than me, much more powerful than me, and I'm wasting cycles trying to guess what the computer is doing, and sometimes I make wrong assumptions and it screw my understanding of something, where I can just run it and get an answer from the compiler. And by the way, the compiler is a valid environment most of the time, unless there's like a probabilistic algorithm or something like that. Most of the time the compiler will, if you print something, it will tell you if your assumption was wrong or not. And so I would really advise, if you're trying to understand some code, to play with it, or if you're trying to understand some algorithm, to try to implement the algorithm. And actually, if you look at the field of mathematics, everybody does that in math. I studied math. What we did was, like, for every subject that we had like 3 hours of exercise every week. And if you haven't done that, if you think of like middle school or high school, when you were studying math, you were doing exercises, right? And doing exercises is really the only way to truly understand something. When you're trying to do exercises in math without looking at the answer, it's possible that sometimes you find an answer and it's actually wrong. So it's good to check your understanding with an answer. But that's really, I had a click when I learned about that. I was like, wow, that's why we do so many exercises in math. There's no way around. That's the best way to learn. And I know many people that told me. I remember Bobby Threadbare from Polygon Maidan. Someone in my field. If you're not studying ZK, then you might not know them. One of the first time I talked to him, he told me, I'm not a mathematician. I just understand things by implementing them. And that I think that's actually a great trait, and it showed like how great the person understood how you learn effectively. Um, and maybe another example is CryptoPals, which is a set of challenges where you can learn how to attack cryptographic protocols by implementing them and implementing attacks. Was started by Tacek, who wanted to learn these things, and I'm guessing that he's one of the persons that understand these attacks the most because he implemented them to learn how they were working. And there's a generation of people, including me, that learn a lot about attacks on cryptographic protocols by just following the CryptoPals exercises. Um, I guess I can say Lera used one of my coworker and non-researcher in the community of cryptography also told me, like I was asking her how to do like good research, and she told me one thing I do personally is that I try to think about the problem before looking at how people solve the problem. And I thought that was interesting because sometimes you think there's no way you're gonna get to the answer because you don't know enough. But by doing this preliminary work of thinking about the problem yourself before looking at solutions, you're actually really getting into the mindset. Sometimes you'll find a solution or the solution that other people think about or wrote about before even looking at that. Um, or sometimes you'll think about the problem enough that when you look at the solutions, first you have a motivation to look at them, and second you'll understand them better. And that's what I call just-in-time learning. I haven't seen anybody else call it that. Maybe there's a better term for it, but when I talk to people about it, I talk about it as just-in-time learning, where you don't try to spend your time reading and reading and reading. Instead, you just try to implement the solution, and once you want to get a better solution or a more secure solution or whatever, then you look into the literature and you learn the stuff you need to learn to get to your solution. And usually you'll understand the solutions much better. You'll read through it faster because you have a real, you want to get to it to be able to implement that. And you'll remember it longer because you made the effort of thinking about it. And maybe one last example is that people learn about compilers. I never really learned about compilers. I never had a course on compilers. What I did was to implement a compiler myself. And as I was doing that, I wrote a lexer because it was a lexer is just the first pass of a compiler that every compiler basically has. And the reason why I wrote a lexer was not that I had learned that a lexer was, something in a compiler. It's just that it was the natural thing to do. I was trying to parse things, and it was hard, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do a first pass where I'm gonna create these tokens and then I'm gonna parse them. And then I realized that this is what compilers call lexers, and I just end up to that natural solution just by trying to solve the problem myself. Okay, so I guess this is all I'll say about that, but I think that's obviously I've talked a lot about this one, so that's one of my most important advice. Context switch is something I've talked about before. I used to also that used to be something that I would be really bad at. I would be overwhelmed by the number of things I would look at, and I would try to do many things, and I would context switch all the time, and by doing that I was never really getting deep into something, and I was never really getting deep knowledge and really understanding what I was looking at. And so that's something that I learned, I guess, really 2 jobs ago when I saw someone. Um, I actually, if he ever watches this video, he's gonna be happy. But I was looking at David Wonsky, a coworker of mine, and what he did was that he just focused on one thing, one entry point, and in 2 or 3 months he had become the master of that thing in the code base. And then once he mastered that thing, he jumped on other parts of the code base and he sort of increased its scope until he understood everything. And in a few months, he was like one of the best engineer on the code base using this technique. So that's something that I've basically done every time I jumped on a new code base or a new concept. Since then, I'm not trying to be everywhere. I'm really trying to focus on depth. It's this breadth versus depth, and breadth will come out of working deeply on many different projects over a lifetime. Okay, This one is, what did I write here? Sheet task for low time. Okay. I did write that actually. So there are periods of time when you're not super motivated and it's really hard to do any work. Usually it's good to have tasks that don't demand a lot of brain cells and things that you didn't want to really do, like spreadsheets or something like that. And that's a good way to be still remain productive when you're not in the best condition. I don't know, you didn't sleep well, um, then just do some admin tasks and things like that, and you can still make progress on things while you're not in the best mindsets. um, okay, I have this quote here for my next one, which is the best athletes are the ones that can constantly silence it. And I've talked about it previously, but I think we have to see ourselves as athletes. We're not, we're not doing some sport, but we are trying to, I mean, at least if you're watching this video and you want to get into that mindset, we are trying to compete. We are trying to be competitive and we're trying to be the best at something. And so we have to think in terms of athletes. And if you look at athletes, what they do is that they really prioritize things like their training, things like recovery, good sleep, good diets, sports, and all these things. And I think this is something that not many people realize in, I'm going to say, in the general field of work that requires you to sit on a chair for most of your days. You don't realize that actually diet and exercise and all these things are important to perform. And I know people that will drink a lot of alcohol and try to perform, and you can't, I mean, maybe you can get by for a few years like that, but on the long run you're not going to get far um, by not taking care of yourself to perform to the maximum. And you see that with even like chess players, competitive chess players will do all sorts of things that have nothing to do with chess just to be able to perform better at chess. And that means also having friends and having real breaks and doing something out of your weekends. And maybe on that, I have an anecdote that's interesting, but I met a coach that used to work at Facebook and that would coach only high level employees at Facebook. So at Facebook you had, or Meta now, you had this this way to rank employees, I guess, this level system, L5, L6, L7, L8. I don't know how far it went. Usually when you start as a junior, you're like L3 or I think L4. Um, and I heard that if you don't get to L5, you can get fired. It's kind of a normal upgrade. But at L5, usually you can remain at L5, and some people try not to get to L6 because they like their lifestyle. Anyway, this is TMI. But this coach that was only training, L7, L8, like whatever, like I asked them, what is something that you've noticed that many high performers have in common? And what he told me really surprised me. He told me that all of them know how to take real breaks. They have a strong support system, a strong group of friends, and they'll do stuff on the weekend. They'll hang out, in the evening. They'll really disconnect, and then they'll get back fresh at work, and they'll do good work. And I thought that was really interesting because every high performer that I know is basically never burning out. I can see them doing that for many, many years. It looks like they're never burning out, and they always seem to be performing at a high level. And I think that's one of the secrets of that also, is that they know how to recover. Um, Maybe one thing that I can talk about also is in terms of um, so the quote was the best athletes are the ones that can constantly silence it. And so to go back to what I was saying before in one of the first points, you're always gonna get these intrusive thoughts of, I want to rest, I want to do nothing, or I want to scroll on my phone, or I want to, you know, do something else. And I think one of the secrets to performing in anything, even in sports or work or anything, is to realize that you're having that thought and to sort of silence it and be like, no, just gonna do it, still gonna do it. The second thing I want to say is that, and this is because I watched a video on training. Maybe I'll post a link, but if I don't post a link because I forget, it's like sparring is changing in the world of martial arts or something like that. It's a video that said that sparring has changed. There's a lot of martial arts where sparring, sparring is when people fight as part of training, not real competition. And apparently a lot of people are hurting themselves fighting, like sparring. And so some people completely stop sparring, and then they would compete and they would, go all out. Or some people trying to rethink sparring. And they noticed that Muay Thai fighters were very performant, but when they would spar, they would never hurt themselves. And basically what was happening, or I mean the TLDW of the video, is that sparring is changing in a way that where people are trying not to hurt themselves and trying to do it more playfully. And by doing it more playfully, they can try more poses, they can put themselves in different positions of, positions of not dominance, but position where you're being dominated. And so you can really think of different scenarios, which you wouldn't do if you're really you're sparring like you're in a real fight and you're trying to win and you're super tense and you're trying to kill the other guy and so on. And so the video made the point that you can never really learn when you're tense and in this kind of stressful setting. And the best way to learn is to play, to be playful. And so a lot of people are sparring this way now in different martial arts where they're just, they're not trying to like hurt the opponent. They're trying to put themselves in different scenarios and they're trying to have fun and they're trying to learn. And when I saw this video, it made me think of I guess League of Legends, if it's a video game, where you have many characters. And I felt like the people that were good in this game were people that played with all the characters. They were always choosing a random character instead of always playing with the same character. And so when you try to put yourself in different kind of situations, you're gonna understand more about the whole dynamic of the game. The other thing is that if you're stressed at work and you have deadlines or you feel overwhelmed by work and the amount of stuff that you need to learn and the amount of work that you have, I think you don't tend to do a good job, and you don't tend to really learn because you're always stressed and in this kind of like, I'm so stressed I can't do anything mode. And so I think it's good to cultivate this kind of playfulness and remind yourself that it's all game. Life is a game. You can do whatever you want with your life, and a job is a job, for example, or you're not gonna lose your life if you don't understand this paper or whatever, or not. And progress is made at whatever pace that you want, and nobody else can dictate the progress or the pacing that you should have. And once you remind yourself these things, I think you can, be happier in your life, but also make more progress and be more efficient and be a better learner. And I've seen that also it reminds me of John Carmack, that I can just picture starting his day and just coding and not really caring about anything else, but just being happy coding and not putting pressure on himself because of deadlines or whatever. Okay, so I guess I've reached half of my list, but I have some good stuff that I still want to talk about. One of them is the concept of a hashmap. And a lot of the time when I get overwhelmed about a concept or a code base or something like that, I don't really know how to deal with it. And one change of framing that I've done is that no, I see it as a puzzle. And when you start assembling a puzzle, you don't understand anything, especially if it's this puzzle that represents the sky with clouds. Like, it's very confusing, but you always get to the end. Like, it's never something that you can do. And if you think about it, there are some things that, like, understanding, you might think it's impossible, you're never gonna get there, but there are things that are much harder than understanding a code base. For example, learning how to speak Chinese. And yet, millions and millions of people are learning Chinese and they're doing it, and maybe it takes time, but and they're stupid, and they're still doing it. So with time, you can always get to it. With time and persistence, you can always get to it. So now the question is, what's how long will it take to get to it, and should you panic because you're not getting there fast enough? And that goes back to what I was saying. Just be, if it's playful and you're just assembling the puzzle, then you have no, you trust the process, then you have no way of panicking or getting overwhelmed by that. It's just normal not to have all the pieces or not to understand much at the beginning. And bit by bit, you'll sort of like aggregate some pieces on the bottom left corner of the puzzle, and at the center, and then they will start connecting, and you'll get more bigger aggregates, and then your puzzle will make more and more sense, and then at the end you'll get the bigger picture. And so I talked about hashmap in the beginning, but really there's two things that are happening here. There's sort of this puzzle picture where you're assembling things from different places without caring too much about understanding everything while you're doing it, and trusting that you will get there. And the other thing is, I think what's happening in our brain is that we're building a hash map where we don't have to always look, go through all the papers or go search the information deep in the code every time we have a question. We'll start storing that into our RAM, into like a memory hash map where it's easily accessible and we have the information right in our head. And the more information that we end up placing in our head, and sometimes you'll have to seek that information many times from the code or some paper or something like that, but it's okay, because at some point, by doing it repetitively, it'll be in your head. You'll have some persistent or semi-persistent storage, will be easy to access it, and then you'll get faster, and you'll assemble the pieces of the puzzle faster, because you'll just have to look in the hash map that you're creating and building in your head to get there. So all I'm saying is that there's a real process to these things, and you have to trust the process. It takes time, but persistence is key, and you just have to spend long periods of uninterrupted time just looking at things. The next thing I wanted to talk about is that reading papers is really a shortcut to getting great ideas and doing great research. Some people wonder how they can do great research, and I think really the secret is that there's no secret. You just have to read stuff. And when you read things, when you read papers, not only you become an expert because you're reading the source of knowledge, the source of truth. All form of knowledge comes from papers, and then it's synthesized in books, but not all bleeding edge fields have books that nicely synthesize things. So you'll have to read papers, and when you do that, you get ideas. It's a magical thing that happens in your brain. You'll magically get ideas, and you'll be able to produce interesting things. But the only way to produce interesting things is to read papers. There's no shortcuts. And so that's something that I would encourage everyone to do, is to create a routine where, every day or every week or every month, or I don't know, you block some time and you're like, okay, I will read for 30 minutes or for an hour, I will read stuff. I will read papers. I have a stack of paper and I will just read it. I think that's a good habit. And that goes on to my next point, which is, I read that blog post. I can't remember from who. Again, I'll try to link it, which was called Just Know Stuff. And that was from a PhD student that was talking to people doing PhDs. I think he was about to finish, or he already finished, or something like that. And he was saying there's no shortcuts. If you want to do good research, you just have to learn the stuff. You're just gonna have to know everything there is to know about the subject. And I think this is good to, a lot of the time, especially if you're not used to do research, you can be in the mindset of, I just need to understand enough to get by. But that's not good enough. That's a hack, and that doesn't, long term, it's not gonna help you. And that's fragile knowledge with no real foundation. At some point, you need to spend the time to really learn your stuff, to really read the things, to really implement them, to really understand them. There's no way around. If you want to be an expert, you're gonna have to read it. Okay, I have three more points that I want to make. And wow, this video is starting to get long. Sorry in advance. But third to last is work with people who have high standard and high work integrity. And I think I read this study that said that the most important research in different fields came from powerhouses, and by that I mean they came from like research groups at strong universities. And what the people said in this article was that they believe that what happens is that in these groups there is very high standards on how to do research, very high work integrity, and when new people arrive, they get trained into that. So it's not that there's a selection that select the best people, even though there is that as well, but there's also some sort of tribal knowledge on how to work and how to do good work that gets passed by from people to others. And maybe it's not really, process where people sit down and they teach each other these things, but it's also you observe the people around you and how they work, you spend time with them, you discuss with them, and you see how they think, and you start understanding how they do things, and that can really prop you up. And that's something that's not new. A lot of people know that if you hang out with people who are less good than you, it might not always prop you up, but if you hang out with people who are really good, it might prop you up. And the saying goes that if you're sitting in a room and you're not the dumbest person, then you're in the wrong room, or something like that. You know the saying. Okay, second to last, side projects. I think side projects and side quests are the best thing you can do in life. I remember reading that story again about Feynman, who was just fucking around with trying to understand why some plates were being wobbly or something like that. And a coworker asking him, "Why are you doing this? Why aren't you focusing on important research?" And then he said, "Well, it's fun." And then years after, he ended up getting a Nobel Prize based on these ideas. And so side projects can really develop in amazing things. And I think not only you learn a lot of things when doing side projects, but you can create startups, all of them, or products, or all sorts of cool or think about Linux. Linux was probably a side project, and Linux just started continuously worked on it for many years. And so I have this other theory that any product that's successful is basically something that was worked on for many years persistently. It's a side project that was where the person behind the side project just insisted for a very long period of time. Okay, my last point is like, don't overdo it. I think it goes back to recovery, but it's easy to be very motivated about something and to work late at night, and then you can't sleep because you're overthinking and overstimulated. And that never works with me, even though I produce a lot of stuff in these moments. What ends up happening is that the next day I don't do anything, or the next week I get into a low period zone. And I think it's better to be consistent and to have real deadlines where like you say to yourself, I'm gonna stop working at this hour, and you really try to stop working, and you unwind, and you focus on something else. And yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I don't have much to say about that, but it's okay. Maybe something else I'll mention is that if you always tell yourself, also if it's somewhat related, but I've noticed that people with kids can be very productive. Some of the people that I know, including my co-founder Gregor, have kids, and a lot of kids sometimes, and in spite of that, they're extremely productive. And so my theory is that when you have kids, you have real deadlines, and so when you have free time, you understand the cost of that free time and the value of that free time, and so you're going to be more productive during that free time, because you know that once you reach the deadline, which is when the babies start crying, or when you have to like pick up the kids at school or something like that, then you know you're not going to be able to work. So you really try to finish your work before you get there. And I've noticed that as well in me when I started working, I was in this mindset of like, it's okay, I'm gonna work during the weekend. And because I was working weekends, I would always procrastinate and I would have to do a bunch of work during the weekend. And I think that's not good. If you have real deadlines, including I don't work during the weekend and I stop working at 5 p.m. or something like that, then you're much more productive during the day because you know you have this deadline and you have to finish your stuff by the deadline. And so instead of procrastinating and not doing really anything interesting with your time, you're actually productive. So anyway, I'm gonna stop it here. I've talked for 45 minutes. I really need to stop talking, and hopefully that's useful. If it's useful to you, leave a comment. Tell me, hey David, you really helped me with this video, and it motivates me to do more of these videos. Anyway, see ya.